I mean, this is neither here nor there. I love Aaron's response when Moses grills him on this, and Moses says, "What have you done?" And Aaron says, "They gave me their golden jewelry, and I threw it into the fire, and this came out."
Right.
It's like the kind of excuse you'd expect from your 5-year-old.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competition, and the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 118, brought to you again by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Well, welcome again to the show. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. I'm sorry we're running a little late. It's been more than a little crazy around here lately. 4 of the 5 members of Armed Lutheran Radio got together on Friday at the NRA annual meetings in Dallas. Awesome time. It was my first NRA annual meeting, and to be honest, it was a little overwhelming. As an introvert who avoids malls at all costs, the NRA annual meetings is really peoply. It's a little hard for someone like me to handle. Take your, if you've never been, and I hadn't until this year, take the biggest gun show you've ever been to and multiply it by, 10. It was huge. And I wasn't even there on the most busy day of the show. Saturday, of course, most people are working on Friday. The locals can't make it. The people from out of town are generally the people who are there on Friday, and Saturday the locals show up, and the turnout kind of triples. We figured we would beat the crowd by arriving an hour after the doors open. They were supposed to open at 9. We figured we'd get there at 10, but apparently everybody else had the exact same idea. I probably should have gotten a hotel in Dallas because to avoid the headache of parking in downtown Dallas and dealing with all the walking and all of that to get from your parking space to the convention center. I had to drive 45 minutes to the nearest light rail station. Then it took another 45 minutes on the train to get to Convention Center Station. And once we got topside, it was raining. There was a small smattering of protesters hanging out. I think there was maybe 4 or 5 people, a couple of signs. They weren't very vocal. We just smiled and waved at them and went on in. I did see pictures that there were maybe a couple of dozen people on Saturday and maybe about 50 to 100 who showed up about 4 blocks away where Alyssa Milano came to Dallas to lead a protest. So the national civilian disarmament movement that was all energized by the Bloomberg brats after the Parkland shooting couldn't even muster 200 people to come to Dallas during the NRA's biggest event of the year. Anyway, we got inside. We finally found the press office where the line to pick up our press out passes was like an hour long. We just stood in line for an hour waiting to get a press pass that honestly didn't give us any more access to the show than just having a regular pass. So I wasted an hour standing in line for that. I had registered for my press pass like 4 months ago, and I never got it in the mail. And I finally sent an email and inquired, and they said, "Oh, we lost a bunch of online registrations. Just go ahead and send in another application." Well, thanks for letting us know. It would have really sucked to have showed up at the show and found out that I didn't have a registration. That would have been a pain. Probably would not have taken me any longer to find that out than it did to just pick up the pass that I got. So when I resubmitted my application, they said it was too late to get it in the mail, so I had to go wait for an hour to get a pass. That was no better than the one everybody else got. So we started 2 hours late, about 11 o'clock, and we started at one end and worked our way across, and we maybe got a third of the show. We maybe saw a third of it. That might be being generous there, because by lunchtime, after about 2 hours, we were starting to get kind of hungry and getting a little tired, so we took a break, had something to eat. Got gouged by the concession stand, $13 for a sandwich and an RC Cola. Then we got back at it. There was a bunch of cool people that I was hoping to see, never got to see. We saw Jerry Michalek. He was in a hurry to get to the Hornaday booth, so we didn't get a chance to talk to him. We did run into our good friends, Rob Morse from the Self-Defense Gun Stories podcast and the author of my favorite children's book, Yehuda Reamer. Got to spend a little time talking to them. We saw Chris Serino of Top Shot fame, genuinely one of the nicest people you would ever meet. He just stopped and talked and spent as much time as we wanted, and it was great. He just a super nice guy. I did get to meet the lovely Jen Jakes, who was formerly at Bearing Arms and is now in a new position at the Truth About Guns. Got to spend a little time talking to her, and the best thing about the whole show was finally meeting face-to-face our own Mia Anstein. In the weeks and months since she joined the show, and thanks be to God that she did, I've never had the pleasure of meeting her face-to-face. We've had FaceTime meetings, we've had round tables, but I've never actually gotten a chance to meet her until Friday at the Brownells booth, and I really enjoyed just walking around and talking and, not really doing show prep kind of stuff like our usual meetings, or, let's record this thing, let's get together and talk about something and record it. This was just, a couple of friends hanging out, talking about the show and talking about stuff. It was great. Just wish I'd had more time, because by the time the exhibit hall closed at 6, my dogs were just absolutely killing me. Mia had ended up, talking to some people that she knew, and I got separated from her and got separated from Bill and his wife. Were kind of wandering around different directions, so I was trying to find them. We finally met up again at the IMI booth, or IWI booth at the far end, and then it was time to go. And so Mia headed back to her hotel, and we headed back to the train station and headed north back to Plano, where Bill and Kat got on, headed back home to pick up their kids, and I headed further north to my family. And when I got up on Saturday, I really planned to go back for a second day, but I just felt awful. I probably was on my feet and walking around a little too much since the surgery, and I was sore in a couple of places that I probably shouldn't have been. So I didn't want to really chance it and strain things any further. So I took it easy on Saturday. Bill and Kat went back, and Mia was there for day 2. I had a bunch of church stuff going on Sunday and couldn't make it back. I had hoped to get back either Saturday or Sunday. I couldn't make it back on either day. Aaron was there for day 3, so I'm sure we'll hear more about that in a future episode. What products did we see that we really liked? What stood out to us? Well, there were several, but I'm going to save that for another episode. I did manage a couple of interviews, and I'm sure Mia did as well. And maybe we can get the crew together in an upcoming episode to sort of a NRA roundtable to talk about the things that we saw that impressed us. So I'll see if I can't put that together for the coming weeks. So what's coming up for today's show? Well, we've got a tip from Aaron Israel talking about lessons from the recent Waffle House shooting. And Pastor Bennett and I are back together for another listener submission, this time from my home state of North Carolina. It's a news story about a new billboard campaign from the North Carolina Council of Churches that accuses gun owners of violating the Second Commandment because they're idolizing their guns. All that's coming your way next after this brief timeout. You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a proud member of the Self-Defense Radio Network. Hey, if you're like me, you like shopping at gun shows. No pressure from sales staff, no need to bother them to ask to look at stuff. You just pick stuff up and dry fire it and look at it and hold it. Imagine if you could get that experience at your local gun store, where you don't need to bother anybody. You don't have to ask people for help if you don't need it. You don't have salespeople hovering over your shoulders. Well, this is what it's like when you shop at G4G Guns. Cassie and Patrick Coburn are the owners, and you've heard them on the program before. They are absolutely awesome people, and they'll help you find exactly the right gear for you. But there's no sales pressure. You just browse the store, you pick up and hold anything that you want to look at without asking permission, just like at the gun show. And once you've found the gun you want, or if you actually do need assistance, Patrick and Cassie are there to help. It's the best of both worlds, gun shop and gun show, in one place. It really is the best. G4G Guns. They're located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. They're open Mondays from 1 to 6, Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7, and on the weekends you'll find them at a gun show near you. Or check them out online at G4G Guns. That's G, the number 4, G, guns.com. G4G Guns, the gallery for great guns. G4GGuns.com.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel with Fundamental Defense, here with your personal defense tip of the week. The only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with the will to fight and the right opportunity to take action. A perfect example of that took place a couple of weeks ago with James Shaw Jr., who was inside the Waffle House when a guy came in and started shooting. A little excerpt from the story on CNN says that Shaw bolted from his seat and slid along the ground to the restroom when the guy started shooting, but he kept an eye and an ear out for the gunman. The moment the shooter paused to reload, Shaw decided to ambush him. Shaw said, "I figured if I was going to die, he was going to have to work for it." He charged at the man with the rifle, and they tussled for what felt like a minute, maybe two, Shaw said. His adrenaline was pumping as the gunman cursed and fought him, he said. The barrel of the rifle was still hot when Shaw managed to wrestle it away from the gunman. He tossed it behind the counter, and the gunman fled. The encounter left Shaw with a burn on his hand and a wound on his elbow where the bullet grazed it. But untold numbers of lives were saved by Shaw's willingness to take action. So it does not matter whether you have your preferred defensive tool with you or not. If you have the will to fight and you wait for the right opportunity, you can make a difference. So that's the message to everyone, whether they choose to be armed or not. Unfortunately, we've cloaked the debate in what kind of tool we're allowed to carry. If anybody suggests that you can defend yourself with your bare hands or rocks or a fire extinguisher or whatever, we have a tendency to scoff at it when it relates to school security and security inside the workplace and all of that. But the reality is that if you have the will to fight and the opportunity to fight and you can use whatever tool is available to you, then you can make a difference. You can stop these mass killings from taking the toll that they have if nobody takes action. So be that good guy, whether you have your gun or not, and be prepared to fight with whatever means necessary, up to and including your bare hands. And look for those opportunities. This guy waited until he recognized that the guy was pausing to reload. So every gun has to be reloaded, whether it's a rifle or a pistol or whatever, and it's going to take X amount of time for that guy to reload, or they could have a malfunction, or they could be coming around a corner not shooting. You just got to wait for your opportunity to take action. Now, that doesn't mean that you're always going to be in the right place at the right time. You may not have an opportunity, but if you have the willing to fight and the opportunity to take action, you can stop a bad guy, whether you are armed or not. Like my friend Rob Pincus says, armed is a state of mind. The tool is irrelevant. Now, we would like to have our most efficient defensive tools wherever we're legally allowed to have them, but the reality is that you cannot have your firearm with you everywhere. And so you need to be prepared to take the kind of action that Mr. Shaw did, and you could save lives. So that's your personal defense tip for the week. Have that armed mindset, and don't worry so much about what tools you have on you at any given moment. Thanks for tuning in.
Aaron Israel is a personal defense network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
If you need a good holster, let me take a minute to tell you about my good friends at Cook's Holsters. If you've got a need for a holster for a carry gun, for competition, for a day at the range, check out Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. They're American-made Kydex holsters, custom-made for your specific firearm with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. And trust me, they stand by that guarantee. I know because I've seen it in action. Great people. You've heard Bob Cook on the podcast a couple of times over the last couple of years. He usually comes in at the end of the year on our Christmas show and talks about what's new for the coming year. He makes a fantastic product, and you will not be disappointed. Trust me, I have been using their holsters for years. I found them when I started doing reviews of holsters back when, in the pre-podcast days, back when I was blogging, and I love the product, and I trust it with my own life. You should give them a shot as well. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get 10% off your order. Check them out, cooksholsters.com today.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to Armed Lutheran Radio. Time now for Clinging to God and Guns, where we analyze, debunk, and dismember articles and videos that attempt to use Scripture to support a position in the gun rights debate. We're joined again by our good friend, John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you. Ready to confront the lies of bad theology with the clenched fist of biblical truth.
Doing your best Dana Lash impersonation.
Yes.
This week, we've got another news story submitted by a listener. This one from my old home state of North Carolina, from the Raleigh News and Observer, published April 10th, and this one's entitled, "The Second Commandment Outweighs the Second Amendment, Thousands of North Carolina Churches Say." "You shall not make for yourself an idol," the Bible's second commandment reads. A new billboard is going up along Interstate 85 and 40 near Mebane, which will include the quote along with a photo of a pile of guns and ammunition. And, of course, this opening statement depends, of course, on how you number the commandments. So
right.
before we dive into the story and get into the stupid, let's look at the numbering and why there's a difference. Can you give us a little bit of a background on the numbering difference for Catholics and Lutherans, and I assume the Eastern Orthodox? The second commandment is, "You shall not take the Lord's name in vain." Where did the idol worship thing come from?
Blame John Calvin. Of course, Lutherans, they kept the same numbering of the commandments that Catholicism had. And I might be mistaken on this, so if I am, please, a user may submit feedback if they want. But I'm pretty confident that the Roman Catholic Church had adopted the Jewish tradition of numbering the commandments. But then in the mid-15th century, we get this knucklehead John Calvin. And Calvin's theology was very legalistic, and it extended to the point that he took a look at this, and those words, "you shall not make for yourself a graven image," are included in God giving the Ten Commandments to Moses. Calvin took a look at that and went to the far extremes so that any visible representation of any member of the Trinity was considered a sin. There was a saying that in Geneva, if there was anything that was fun, it was illegal, because John Calvin had, through his influence, had more or less converted the city of Geneva into something similar to an Old Testament theocracy, where you could be put in the stocks in the city square for doing anything that was frowned upon by these pietists. So that's where the difference in the numbering comes from.
All right, so back to our story. The billboard is from the North Carolina Council of Churches, a statewide organization representing 18 Christian denominations in the state and 6,200 individual congregations. About 1.5 million North Carolinians are members of congregations under the council's umbrella. Quote, "It will go up this week," and this was, like I said, April 10th, "and stay in place for the next 4 weeks. Another crucial message for all of us while gun violence continues to erupt all around," end quote, the council said in a news release announcing the billboard. All right, so let's give you an idea for those of you who are not familiar with North Carolina politics, North Carolina churches, give you kind of an idea who the North Carolina Council of Churches is. The council was founded in 1935 to promote Christian unity. Over the years, though, it's kind of strayed away from that mission, and it's turned into more of a political organization than it is a religious organization. The motto, strength through unity and peace through justice. So that gives you an idea of kind of what they're all about.
Just hearing that makes me feel dirty.
And here's some of the groups. They do represent a large number of congregations and 18 denominations, including the AME churches, Mennonites, Moravian churches, the North Carolina Alliance of Baptists, the Episcopal Church, Methodists, Presbyterian Church USA, the Reformed churches, the UCC. There's a number of independent Baptist churches, and our good friends, the ELCA. Of course. So all of the members here are progressive, far-left, social justice churches. And if you visit their website, you'll find lots of political stuff and not much Christianity. I remember seeing things about sustainability and voting rights and the politics of eating, whatever that means. Immigrant rights, support for public schools, gender equality. And they're so bad, back in 2013, the Roman Catholic bishops in North Carolina withdrew from the council because of their position on gay marriage and because the council has no stated position on abortion, which is basically means that they support abortion. They just don't want to come out and say it.
Right. Their silence is consent.
Yes. This is when they say Council of Churches, this isn't a church in the sense the Bible refers to it. It's sort of a council of progressives who just happen to go to church.
Right.
So back to the article. The article is actually based, of course, on a press release from the Council of Churches. And it's really the meat of today's segment. So rather than go on with the sort of the bits and pieces from the article that was provided to us by the listener, we dug a little deeper and we got into a couple of articles that are the foundation of this news story, and it's where the Council of Churches announced this new billboard plan, and they explain why they're doing it. So here we go. While amendments and policies related to gun control dominate the airwaves, the North Carolina Council of Churches is pointing to a different directive to guide the conversation about guns and safety in our country. The second commandment, right after God commands God's people not to follow other gods, God commands the people not to have any idols. Idols can assume a lot of guises in our world that we don't immediately understand as idolatry. For many of us, guns have become the symbol of safety, the idol we turn to because we, quote unquote, believe in them to keep us safe. When we first looked at this, and I showed this to you, your initial reaction was that this wasn't even a proper interpretation of the Reformed version of the Second Amendment or Second Commandment. Why did you say that?
Well, so John Calvin was influential in the formulation of the Westminster Catechism. The Westminster Catechism was written in 1646 and 1647. Basically, it was written by the Church of England, and it served as the basis of catechetical teaching for all Reformed churches. And for every Reformed church that has their roots in the Church of England, which it includes the Baptists, the Methodists, Presbyterians, all of it. The Westminster Catechism more or less refutes their interpretation or perversion of the Second Commandment as the Reformed number it. So this is directly from the Westminster Catechism. Questions 108 and 109. First, what are the duties required in the Second Commandment? The answer is the receiving, observing, and keeping pure and entire all such religious worship and ordinances as God has instituted in His Word, particularly prayer and thanksgiving in the name of Christ, the reading, preaching, and hearing of the Word, the administration and receiving of the sacraments, church government and discipline, the ministry and maintenance thereof, religious fasting, swearing by the name of God and vowing unto Him, as also the disapproving, detesting, opposing all false worship, and according to each one's place and calling, removing it, and all monuments of idolatry. So, in that sense, there's still a little bit of wiggle room because it says there at the end, all monuments of idolatry. But the next question, question 109, what are the sins forbidden in the Second Commandment? Here, it more or less defines that idolatry. The answer, the sins forbidden in the Second Commandment are all devising, counseling, commanding, using, and anywise approving any religious worship not instituted by God himself, tolerating a false religion, the making any representation of God or any or all or any of the three persons, either inwardly in our mind or outwardly in any kind of image or likeness of any creature. All worshiping of it, or God in it, or by it. Sounds a little confusing there, but it's referring to those images either in our mind or outward. The making of any representation of feigned deities and all worshiping of them or service belonging to them. And then it goes on and listing all these various types of idolatry, which incidentally don't refer to any inanimate objects that look anything like a gun.
Right.
So to summarize that, it's more or less saying you're not to have any visible representation of God and worship it.
Right. And I don't know of any gun owners who are worshiping their guns. While we may have a gun for our protection, we don't set up an idol to it and worship it. We don't bow down before it or pray to it. That's idolatry.
It is, and I'm almost tempted as a joke to make a little shrine with candles and everything with my gun there in the center, just as a joke to
do a meme.
But the problem is, the anti-gun left would probably run with that and say, "See, they really do worship their guns."
Beyond the second commandment in Exodus, where is idolatry addressed primarily in the Bible? I know Exodus 20 is the question of idolatry. Is it taken up anywhere else in the Bible? I think is it Romans 1?
Yes. In Romans 1, Paul talks about those who have departed from the faith, or those who never belong to the faith, as worshiping the creation rather than the creator. So idolatry is brought up in Scripture in more than just the Old Testament and the giving of the Ten Commandments, and we see how this is applied in a practical sense. If you read the book of Judges, if you read 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, closely mirror each other. They contain many of the same stories, but there's some stories that are unique to each of those books. But there's stories of gross idolatry that takes place during that period of time in the Old Testament, and there are severe repercussions for it. And in each of these cases, they're not, worshiping swords. They're worshiping false idols that are visible representations of the pagan gods of the Canaanite people.
Right.
Well, and a perfect example, too, is as Moses is going up on Mount Sinai to receive the Ten Commandments, he comes down, and what does he find? These darn dirty Israelites worshiping the golden calf, which incidentally was a visible representation of a pagan god of the Egyptians. But, this is neither here nor there. I love Aaron's response when Moses grills him on this, and Moses says, "What have you done?" And Aaron says, "They gave me their gold and jewelry, and I threw it into the fire, and this came out."
Right.
It's like the kind of excuse you'd expect from your 5-year-old.
I didn't do it.
The fire did it.
It's like Bart Simpson. I didn't do it. Nobody saw me do it. You can't blame me. Nobody's bowing down to their guns. We don't trust in our gun to protect us. If I set my gun on the table, it's not going to protect me, and you're an idiot if you think it will. But God protects us, and we've talked about this many times. God protects us in this life through means. And we don't pray for the gun to protect us. We don't say, "Oh, heavenly Glock 26, protect me from the evil one."
I love the way that Luther so simply and succinctly summarizes this notion of idolatry, for the Reformed, the combination of the first and second commandments. Luther says, "That to which your heart clings and entrusts itself is truly your God." So do I cling to my guns and place my trust in them? Absolutely not. And I would be the first to stand up and say that if there is somebody out there who claims to be a Christian and they are so obsessed with their guns that they just couldn't live without them, I would say you've got a problem. Yep. But what they're doing here is they're saying that anybody who owns a firearm for the purposes of self-defense is guilty of idolatry.
Because having a gun doesn't make you safe. And that is the reason that we wanted to dig into this press release instead of the news article, because next the justification for this whole thing is a series of really, really bad statistics. So back to the story from the NCCC. For many of us, guns have become the symbol of safety, the idol we turn to because we believe in them to keep us safe. Meanwhile, statistics show exactly the opposite, with the presence of guns actually making us less safe. An average of 96 people are killed by guns every day in this country, but less than 4% are killed in mass shootings. While mass shootings are horrific and should always lead the news cycle, more insidious statistics about gun deaths rarely make the news.
This is interesting because they're taking a different approach. They're divesting themselves of the language regarding mass shootings, and they're saying that since that's such a small percentage, we're going to focus on guns in general. Did you catch that?
Yep, that statistic can easily be debunked. So we're going to, instead of focusing on the very rare, we're going to dissuade you from having guns because of the everyday problems that guns cause.
Which is interesting because the statistics they provide
are awful.
Yeah, and easily debunked.
So here we go. States with more guns have more deaths. So right out the gate, completely wrong.
And also, it's worth noting that they nowhere provide any sources to back up anything. So whenever anyone cites statistics without providing data to support it, I'm always suspicious.
Yes, and you should be. And it's a great source for information if you hear these arguments and you don't have the facts at hand and you want to find them, go to gunfacts.info. And they have lots of facts and statistics and lots of charts and lots of graphs. Everything is cited, all the sources. You can go look them all up. Guess who's at the top of the list? The District of Columbia, where gun ownership is just 26%, but they have the highest murder rate in the country. Then you've got Missouri with just over a quarter of the population with guns, but they're the third worst. Fifth is Delaware. They've got 6%. Only 6% of their population own guns. But their murder rate is they're fifth out of 51 if you count the District of Columbia,
and that's just
fifth worst.
Insane. It's
Maryland.
Insane.
Maryland is in sixth place.
The statistic they give though that states with more guns have more deaths. The way that they put that, what kind of deaths?
Well, no, yes, they have more. They say they have more deaths. That's true. Now, that's a distinction that I didn't look at. That's a good point. I went and I actually looked at gun deaths.
And they're just arguing deaths, which is...
And they're just saying deaths of all kinds. That's true. I didn't even catch that.
But here's the other part of this that's absolutely moronic. Whenever any statistics like this are listed, they completely ignore the incidence per capita. Rather, they look at total numbers. So you have a state like California.
Mm-hmm.
California is a high population state. They also have a lot of guns. And so they have more deaths because they're a high population state. It's not because of the guns. It's simply because of the population. Same thing can be said of Texas. Texas is the second most populous state in the country.
Yep.
And yet...
And they rank in terms of the number of gun deaths, they rank kind of in the middle, both of them, interestingly enough. And they have completely different policies on guns.
Right.
The lowest rate that I found... 0.3 per 100,000 gun deaths, Hawaii, and yet 45% of their citizens own guns.
Hunting
45%.
Hawaii. Yeah.
And so that 45% is one of the highest rates in the country, and yet they have one of the lowest murder rates with guns. So if you look at the chart, there is absolutely no correlation between the percentage of gun ownership in a state to the gun death rate in that state. It's just... That's that, and again, they don't cite any statistics, so you have to go look for them yourself.
Right.
When you do, you'll find out they're lying to you.
The way they're doing statistics is A plus B equals purple. They take two facts and come up with an inconsequential result.
For each time a gun is used in self-defense in the home, let's see, there's the qualifier, in the home, there are 7 assaults or murders, 11 suicide attempts, and 4 accidents involving guns in a home.
And I've heard this statistic before. And where this statistic is misleading and downright dishonest is it only includes those incidents that take place in the home and when the trigger is pulled.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you look at and I go back to the Clinton era because, of course, Clinton was no fan of guns, but the Clinton Department of Justice, with their study, that anywhere between 200,000 and they had all the way up to 3 million incidents per year, because it included situations where someone's trying to break down my door and I say, I have a gun, and they take off.
Mm-hmm.
That ought to be included in a self-defense use of a firearm, because the mere presence of it is often a deterrent for crime. But they don't want to use that in their statistic here, the North Carolina Council of Churches, because obviously it does not fit their ideology.
Right. And it turns out, I don't know whether you saw this, just last week, it was discovered that the CDC actually did a study on defensive gun uses. And they buried the results because guess what? 2.5 million times a year, they discovered guns are used, just like you said, defensively.
Oh, no. Say it isn't so.
So Gary Kleck's, research from back in the 90s was actually confirmed by the CDC, but they didn't publish the results. And this is another one of those. Notice every time you get statistics from the left, they always put these funny qualifiers in, right, to try to boost the numbers. So that first claim, states with guns have more deaths. Well, they don't qualify, like you said, what kinds of deaths. So, and just like there's no correlation between the number or the percentage of gun ownership and the number of gun deaths, there's definitely no relation between guns and deaths in general. And then this one, they qualify this claim by using the in the home qualifier. So if you narrow it down to just gun deaths in the home, you're ignoring all the times that guns are used negatively and positively outside the home to get a result that you want.
Right. It's torturing statistics until you get the information that you want.
Yes. 62% of gun deaths are suicides.
That is correct.
That's true, but why should that be a reason for us to talk about restricting gun rights? The correlation between guns and suicides is just crap. That's
like saying if we banned razor blades, no one would kill themselves by cutting their wrists.
Right, exactly. The intentional self-harm is a mental health issue. It's not a gun issue. Look at Japan as an example. Almost no guns in private hands except for, sporting clubs, and yet their suicide rate is twice ours. So
it's one of the highest in the world.
Yep. 43% of homes with guns and children have at least one unlocked firearm, resulting in 62 children who are accidentally shot and killed each year.
The only way I can imagine them coming up with something like this is they did a phone poll in an area that's known to be strongly Republican with a high rate of firearm ownership, because there's a lot of people that own guns and teach their children how to use them that, because they've taught their children to be responsible, don't feel the need to lock them up. Now, I will go to say that if you have kids in the home, you need to have those firearms locked up, because kids sometimes bring friends over.
Right. And no matter how good your kids are, they will occasionally do stupid things.
Exactly. It's tragic that 62 children are shot and killed each year because a firearm was not properly secured. But what percentage of the population is 62 out of 320 million?
This qualifier of unlocked firearms could very easily be just another twist of, like, you and I. We secure our firearms in safes, but I don't put a gun lock on my gun. Therefore, you could, if you wanted to twist the numbers, you could say that you and I have unlocked firearms in our home.
True.
Right?
True. I could see how one would say that. Yeah. I don't have that trigger lock. That every trigger lock that I have received with the guns I've purchased are still sitting in the cases in a separate cabinet away from my guns.
I have a gun lock box with just a pile of those cable locks. Yeah, so I could easily see where you take a poll, you ask people if they use trigger locks, they say generally no, and then you end up with this statistic that about homes with unlocked firearms. Domestic violence situations involving a gun increase a woman's chance of death 5-fold.
So they prefer that women be helpless instead.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that sounds like the argument, and you could ask Carol Bowen how that worked out for her, but sadly, she is dead because of stupid gun control laws that didn't protect her.
Yes, the problem, and again, just like the suicide question, the problem isn't the gun. The problem is domestic violence in general. Tens of thousands of women suffer domestic abuse, sadly, and violence at the hands of intimate partners. That has nothing to do with guns. So, do you care about the victims of those abuses, or do you only care about the ones that are killed with guns? Another statistic related to this, the domestic violence. Of the 2.5 million defensive gun uses every year, about 8% of those, somewhere close to 190,000 times a year, it's a woman that does it.
And for all the nonsense that the left spouts about women and women's rights and equality, this position is very anti-women.
Yes. The firearm death rate in the U.S. for children 14 and younger is nearly 12 times higher than the combined rate in 14 other modernized or modern industrialized nations. Again, I was trying to find this statistic. I'm calling BS on it because I couldn't. Whenever they use this modern industrialized kind of modifier, again, it tells you that they're cherry picking data.
Right. And it doesn't say the top modern industrialized nations. They're just saying these specific 14. So what they're picking Norway and, well, they can't pick Norway because Norway tops the list for mass gun deaths. So
right, exactly.
Maybe they're going with countries where they have almost no firearms whatsoever, like, Japan or Hong Kong or places like that. Because they don't give you the information and because they don't provide the site a source for their statistic. Yeah, I am calling BS on this one too.
So they're claiming that we're worse than 14 others, but how many other countries are worse than us?
Right.
Right? Where do we rank overall? Most of those countries that they usually cite, like Japan, for example, have very homogenous societies. We're very diverse, very large country. And none of those countries, and in many cases, those countries that we're compared to have absolutely no gun culture and never have.
And I'd be willing to bet that wherever they get this torture statistic from, it doesn't take into account other socioeconomic factors like gang violence and poverty.
Right. The problem that we face with violence in this country is a cultural issue. It is a societal issue. And as long as we keep focusing on tools and not on the root cause, which is people, we're never going to get a hold of this and we're never going to change things. But interestingly enough, as the number of civilian guns has gone up since 1993, and thanks in large part to President Obama's 8 years of gun ownership promotion, gun deaths have actually gone down. And especially, and among children, it's dropped dramatically.
Yep.
So this whole thing isn't really about idolatry. It's about lying and using false statistics to discourage people from owning guns for self-defense or supporting gun rights. It's shaming them into thinking that having a gun is bad, it's dangerous. And if you don't agree, you're an idolater.
Yeah, that's the most, if they just wanted to take the political stance on it, I'd be like, fine, whatever, that's your politics, and you're hiding behind the guise of being a church organization to do it. Mm-hmm. But they try and use biblical passages to support their position. There was another article written by the same lady that drafted that press release, who is the director of this organization. And she says, so we keep our weapons on standby, nuclear arms stored by our nation for self-defense, as well as concealed weapons we can draw for personal defense. Either way, this shows we don't really have confidence in the God who promises abundant life. In another place, Jesus suggests that those of us who obsess over saving our lives have already lost them. And then she lists Matthew 16:25, Mark 8:35, and Luke 9:24. What's the problem with this? Well, she's taking these passages out of context. No surprise.
Shocker.
Each of those passages say in almost identical language, because these are all parallel passages from the Gospels, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will save it. She's leaving out the part where it says loses his life for my sake. Mm-hmm. How many times have we said that if someone comes to take your life because it's persecution by the government and so forth, yes, we ought to lay down our lives for the faith. If someone sticks a gun to your head and says, deny Christ or die, what do you do? Well, I would rather go be with my Maker than spend the rest of my life knowing that I have denied Christ.
Yep.
And this is made even clearer, though, that Jesus is referring to the faith in those who would give up their life for him, because he goes on to say in the Luke account, "For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." So Jesus is talking about those who deny the faith.
Right.
He is not talking about those who would trust in the evil guns to defend themselves.
Right. To this end, the council is trying to reframe some of the contentious issues in the public discourse by reminding people of faith of the guiding principles found in our scriptures and our creeds.
Hey, I thought these folks were the types that say deeds, not creeds.
Well, they do put creeds in lowercase, so.
True. That must be a reference to their statements of belief on their website, which are a bunch of garbage.
Yes. Their creeds involve politics. As people of faith, we should always guard against those things that become more important to us than the God who calls us to abundant life. How much more so should we call out the idols that hold out false promises? Couple of phrases there that jumped out at me. The God that calls us to abundant life. This almost sounds like a Joel Osteen line. Or is she talking about abundant life in this world? Because I thought that God was calling us to abundant life in the next.
She uses the same language in that other article I mentioned. It says here, Jesus wants that for us, abundant life. And here, at least she's making the distinction of life in Christ, but at the same time, this isn't at the same time incompatible with owning a firearm for self-defense.
If you take this definition of abundant life to mean abundant life in this world, what does that say about the people who don't live abundantly? The people who are either do live long lives in poverty, or the people whose lives are cut short, either by disease or crime or natural disaster or war. Did God not want abundant life for them?
I guess not.
And then the idols that hold out false promises is the other phrase that jumped out at me.
Are evil guns, is what she's saying.
That they hold the promise of protection. I get what she's trying to drive at here, that we should fear, love, and trust in God above all things. It's what we talk about in the explanation of the first commandment. But because we own a gun doesn't mean we trust in it more than we trust in God. I don't trust in my fire extinguisher more than I trust in God. And the gun can't do anything without some human interacting with it. So unless you've got, which would be kind of cool, some sort of a motion-activated turret system to defend your home, you can't trust the gun to keep you safe. And even the most ignorant derps in the gun community don't make that claim.
Right.
We trust in the Lord and give him thanks and praise for the ability, right, the means to protect ourselves. For the training, the people who can train us, the practice, the companies that make the products and the accessories that make us or that allow us to defend ourselves, the alarms, the holsters, the guns. We thank him for the skill or the ability to hone a skill through practice and training, and for the instructors who teach us. But apart from that, the gun can't protect you. The gun's just an inanimate object, and we nobody's trusting in it to protect us apart from our own action.
You know, if she were intellectually honest, and this would go for anybody who shares her opinion, then you would have to say that the person who, they have, wife and 3 kids, and just like myself, got a wife and 3 kids. And if they bother to check the safety rating of a vehicle before purchasing it, that they are being idolatrous and they are not putting their trust in God alone.
Right. Why are you looking at those safety ratings? God will protect you.
Yeah. There was, this goes back a couple of years ago, there was a big house fire of a member of the congregation. And, sadly, he's been an inactive member for quite some time, but I stopped and visited after the fire. And you know what we did the next day? Well, at least what I did, I went and I bought a bunch of smoke detectors and carbon monoxide sensors.
You idolater.
I'm a filthy idolater. Not only that, but I also bought batteries to put in them.
My goodness. Battery-operated idols. This is next to last. This is where I wanted to close up on the article. No one in the Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative, whatever that is, wants to repeal the Second Amendment. And many gun rights advocates support laws that include reasonable restrictions. The argument that criminals can always get a gun may be true, but we should make it very hard and very expensive for them to do so. Good gun laws will never prevent good gun owners from having their weapons. In short, we must confess guns are not the solution to our safety. Our communities could become safer by feeding the hungry, welcoming the stranger, caring for the sick, and visiting the imprisoned. That could be a message for our next billboard.
I just threw up in my mouth a little.
This is just verbal sleight of hand, isn't it? I mean, this is the first.
She's saying that, but we ought to make it very hard and very expensive for criminals to get guns.
So why are we supporting policies that would only affect the law-abiding?
Right. So instead, let's make it very expensive and very difficult for law-abiding citizens to get their hands on guns, because last time I checked, criminals can't pass a criminal background check, and so they get their firearms through illegal means.
Well, this whole paragraph is nothing but little sort of, like I said, it's sort of sleights of hand. I mean, the Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative. Well, notice how every time the anti-gun left comes up with, they always come up with these innocuous sounding euphemisms when it's really just gun control, right? It's gun safety or violence prevention. And nothing they propose is actually going to make us safe or prevent violence.
No. Every law-abiding gun owner could say that they're part of the Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative. Yes. Because we don't want gun violence either.
Yes, exactly right. And no one in the Gun Violence Prevention Collaborative wants to repeal the Second Amendment. Well, they do want to restrict the crap out of it, though. Because if you look at the collaborative's partners, Moms Demand Action and all the different church bodies listed, they all want to expand background checks, which will have zero effect on violence. They want to ban what they call high-capacity magazines. Again, zero effect on violence. Many of them call for registration of guns and licensing of gun owners, and they want assault weapons, quote-unquote, to be banned. So they may not come out and say they want to repeal the Second Amendment. They just want to restrict it as much as they possibly can. Then the next claim, the false claim, this suggestion that we as gun owners support reasonable restrictions, that is actually true as long as they're reasonable. And the problem is we already have them. We already have the background check law. We already have laws against felons and mentally defective people and domestic abusers to keep them from getting guns. We have all those things and more. So yeah, we support that stuff. So when she makes that claim, it's sort of a half truth. And in this final paragraph, she says, good gun laws will never prevent good gun owners from having their weapons. But name for me one law that the North Carolina Council of Churches will advocate for that will still allow me to own a modern sporting rifle.
Mm-hmm.
We see this so often. I mean, we've seen this idea before, the suggestion that you're an idolater if you trust in your gun ownership and therefore you should give them up. Your final thoughts on using the second commandment in this way, or the commandment against idolatry?
This this is so subtle and deceptive because they've done a lot of work to try and sound as reasonable as possible.
Right.
But to pervert God's word in this way, to twist the scriptures, to ignore the truth of the statistics that are not hard to find if you use a stinking search engine like Google. They're trying to hide behind the guise of being a legitimate Christian organization in order to promote their political advocacy, and they're doing it solely because they want people to take them seriously. Let's pretend to be as Christian as we can possibly bear in order to persuade at least a few.
Well, I think that wraps it up. Pastor, thank you for going through this with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you to our listener for submitting it. If you have an article or a video that you would like us to fisk, send it to us. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback and leave us a voice message or a voicemail or an email. We'd love to hear from you. Tune in again next time for another edition of Clinging to God and Guns right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.